This isn't just legal drama, this is a line in the sand. A war between the powerful and the people who dare to speak out. For weeks, Blake Lively's legal team has been quietly targeting independent voices, journalists, content creators, commentators, all under the guise of discovery in her ongoing lawsuit. But now everything has changed. A judge has just tentatively quashed one of the most controversial subpoenas filed by her lawyers. And the ripple effect is massive. Because let's be clear, the subpoena wasn't about justice, it wasn't about protecting the truth, it was about power. About silencing someone who asked too many questions, who got too close to something Blake's team wanted buried. But instead of winning in silence, they've now ignited a firestorm. This is the moment. The legal strategy backfired. What began as an attempt to dig into private communications and scare off criticism has now become a public reckoning. Media watchdogs are speaking out. First Amendment lawyers are stepping in, and creators everywhere, they're fighting back. Live. In this video, we're breaking down exactly how the court responded, why the subpoena was struck down, and how Blake Lively's reputation may never recover from this PR and legal fallout. This isn't just about one journalist, it's about everyone who values truth, free speech, and accountability. Blake Lively may have started this war quietly, but now it's loud, and the world is watching. The courtroom strategies began quietly. Blake Lively's team filed targeted subpoenas against several individuals covering the legal drama, mostly content creators, podcasters, and journalists. Many saw it as a pressure tactic, but her lawyers framed it differently, as a quest for the truth. They claimed that these subpoenas were meant to determine the origin of certain leaks that had put Lively's private communications in the spotlight. But when the first subpoena landed, it sent shockwaves through the digital commentary world. The recipient was an independent journalist, someone who had been publicly documenting inconsistencies and contradictions in Lively's legal filings. Within hours of being served, the journalist retained counsel and fought back publicly and fiercely. And that moment lit the fuse. Other creators began speaking out. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one lawsuit. It became about who had the right to comment, investigate, and report on a matter of public concern. The legal strategy that had perhaps been designed to control narrative now risked turning into a firestorm. The legal filings were intense. Motions to quash the subpoenas began to flood in. Lawyers for the creators argued that the subpoenas were overly broad, invasive, and potentially unconstitutional. Legal scholars began weighing and calling this a potential misuse of the legal system. But Blake's team didn't back down, at least not at first. They doubled down. They argued that the journalists and creators had played a role in damaging their clients' public reputation and deserved to answer for it in court. And then everything shifted. In a packed courtroom, the motion to quash was finally heard. Attorneys for the journalist made a passionate case, arguing that the subpoena violated constitutional protections. They emphasized that the journalist was engaged in legitimate reporting, not harassment, and that their content was protected under the First Amendment. The judge listened carefully, and while no immediate ruling was made that day, observers noted something important: the tone of the bench had changed. Court transcripts later revealed pointed questions from the judge directed at Blake Lively's counsel. Questions like, what is the clear nexus between the creator and the original source of the leak? Have you exhausted less invasive options? Is this request proportional to the needs of the case? These weren't softball questions. These were judicial warnings, and they echoed through the legal community like thunder. Behind closed doors, even legal consultants hired by media outlets began discussing whether this case could become a precedent-setting moment. The very idea that a celebrity, no matter how high profile, could issue subpoenas to commentators simply for talking about their lawsuit was seen as dangerous. And for Blake Lively's team, the optics were getting worse by the hour. They were no longer the aggrieved party in a defamation suit. They were increasingly being viewed as aggressors, wielding legal power in ways that infringed on public discourse. It wasn't a good look. And when the judge finally returned with a tentative ruling, it shook the courtroom. The judge issued what legal analysts call a tentative inclination, a pre-ruling signal. And it was not in Blake Lively's favor. The court was inclined to grant the motion to quash. In plain terms, the subpoena would be struck down. The courtroom erupted. Blake's attorneys immediately requested a chance to respond with supplemental filings, but the damage had been done. A legal maneuver they had relied on for weeks was unraveling in front of them. The journalist's attorneys issued a statement outside the courtroom. Today's ruling is a victory for press freedom, for transparency, and for every creator who dares to ask questions. We will not be silenced. Social media blew up. Legal hashtags started trending. Blake Lively's name was suddenly attached to a very different kind of headline, one that accused her team of overreach and suppression. Commentators began asking new questions. Was this a miscalculation? Was Lively's team trying to intimidate their critics rather than win in court? Was this about facts or narrative control? And that's when the dominoes started to fall. Other subpoenas reportedly filed against other creators were being quietly withdrawn. Lively's lawyers appeared to be backpedaling. It was a retreat disguised as procedural discretion. And the public, they weren't buying it. The public fallout was swift and brutal. Prominent legal voices on social media openly criticized the tactic. Civil rights attorneys gave interviews stating that this could spark a broader legal challenge, one that might reach higher courts if it continued. Meanwhile, the journalist at the center of the fight began streaming again live in a dramatic, on-camera moment. Their attorney appeared beside them and confirmed, "We fought back. And we won, at least for now." Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' reputations took a hit. Media outlets that had once painted them as victims of misinformation were now running headlines like, "Blake Lively legal team overreaches, court pushes back, Reynolds' Lively strategy backfires as journalists win in court." And behind closed door, sources close to the couple reportedly expressed concern over the PR consequences. Ryan Reynolds, known for his usually controlled public image, had remained silent. But the silence was telling. This moment was no longer just a legal skirmish, it had become a turning point. The strategy of going after creators had become its own headline. And it wasn't a flattering one. Now the war had changed. It wasn't just in court, it was in the press, on YouTube, in comment sections, across TikTok, everywhere. As the news of the subpoena being tentatively quashed spread, it didn't just stir commentary creators or independent journalists. It lit a fire across the entire legal and media landscape. In legal circles, what had previously been viewed as a Hollywood curiosity was now transforming into a possible precedent. The question on everyone's lips wasn't just, can celebrities use the court to go after content creators? It was, what happens now that someone fought back? And when legal commentators, some of whom had been quietly observing the case, began speaking out boldly and publicly. Several appeared on legal podcasts, news panels, and live-streamed analysis sessions, saying they were relieved by the judge's decision to side with the motion to quash, albeit tentatively. But their commentary didn't stop there. They laid into the original subpoena, calling it broad, chilling, and likely unconstitutional. According to one former federal prosecutor, there's a line between protecting a client's interest and weaponizing the legal process to muzzle free expression. What I see here isn't just a PR failure, it's a dangerous misuse of discovery. And suddenly the narrative shifted. Where Blake Lively's team once enjoyed sympathy for trying to control rumors and protect private information, they were now being accused of trampling on journalistic protections and public interest speech. The language in court filings was dissected, parsed, and exposed. Commentators began posting screenshots of the subpoenas revealing just how much information Lively's team was requesting from creators and journalists. Everything from private communications to unpublished drafts. And that's when the broader media community started paying attention. Major digital outlets who had been silent or tentative before now began digging in. BuzzFeed, Rolling Stone, Vulture, and Deadline ran features on the case, not on the original lawsuit, but on the subpoenas themselves. This wasn't just about one creator or journalist anymore. It was about a legal strategy that had arguably gone too far. More creators who had received subpoenas but stayed quiet began to speak up. Some said they were initially scared into silence. Others confessed they didn't know how to respond or couldn't afford legal counsel. But now, after seeing a successful quashing of one subpoena, they realized they weren't alone. There was momentum, and more importantly, there was solidarity. What began as a whisper campaign of creators supporting one another through back channels suddenly turned into a public wave. Live streams were scheduled, interviews were arranged. A media law coalition offered pro bono legal help for any journalist or content creator caught in the crosshairs of the case. One prominent attorney stated, "This isn't just about Blake Lively anymore, it's about the misuse of subpoenas as a tactic of intimidation. If we let this go unchallenged, every journalist in Hollywood could be next." At the center of this storm was the journalist whose subpoena had just been quashed. Instead of retreating from the spotlight, they leaned in. In a now viral live stream, they described what they'd gone through, how the subpoena demanded access to all communication with anonymous sources, how it sought drafts of unpublished commentary, and how it even asked for records related to financial earnings from videos and posts. The implications were chilling. The journalist made it clear, if they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone with a voice and an opinion, but not anymore. That door's been slammed shut thanks to this ruling. Public reaction exploded. Tweets with hashtag subpoena quashed, Hashtag free speech matters and hashtag Blake Lively legal backlash started trending. Some tweets showed side-by-side comparisons of celebrity quotes about privacy and the language their lawyers were using in these aggressive filings. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, and yet Blake Lively's legal team didn't stop moving. Even as the first subpoena was quashed, they filed paperwork indicating they would reevaluate their discovery plan. Some experts saw this as code for back away without admitting defeat. Others were less generous. They called it strategic damage control, but the damage had been done. The media narrative had flipped. Ryan Reynolds, notably silent during the subpoena controversy, found himself dragged back into the conversation. His name was now being mentioned in the same breath as the subpoenas, not because he issued them, but because he was allegedly aware of them. Tabloid coverage turned speculative. Did Ryan approve the legal strategy? Is Blake Lively being advised to cut losses? Could this backfire in their public life and career? Hollywood publicists were reportedly watching the situation closely. One anonymous insider told a well-known industry blog, "This is the kind of overreach that sticks. Even if the case is dropped or settled later, the optics of going after creators like this, it's not a good look, especially for someone with Blake's brand." And speaking of brands, several companies that had ongoing PR partnerships with either Blake or Ryan were reportedly conducting internal reviews. This didn't mean they were pulling away, but they were watching. That's when another twist emerged. The journalist's legal team filed a separate motion not just to quash the subpoena, but to request sanctions for the filing itself. They argued that the subpoena was so egregious, so devoid of legal merit, and so clearly designed to intimidate that Blake Lively's team should be sanctioned financially. If the court agrees, it could mark an escalation far more damaging than just bad PR. It would send a message that weaponizing legal tools against the press or independent creators would come with a price, literally. As the next court date loomed, more creators began preparing statements. Some who had remained quiet due to fear or confusion were now emboldened. They began talking publicly and in some cases threatening counter-litigation if more subpoenas were issued. This was now an all-out information war. Meanwhile, PR and legal experts alike began issuing public statements, warning other celebrities to tread carefully. It became clear if Blake Lively's team continued to use legal intimidation as a tactic, they might risk not just public outrage but legal precedent. And perhaps the most revealing sign that things were unraveling, a leak from inside the legal camp itself. An anonymous source from within Blake Lively's broader legal orbit allegedly told a reporter, "This got way too big, way too fast. We tried to plug a leak and now we're drowning in floodwater." That metaphor couldn't be more accurate. What began as a defamation case with carefully chosen subpoenas had turned into an uncontrollable PR and legal wildfire. And now the public, armed with facts, transcripts, legal analysis, and their own platforms, wasn't just watching, they were fighting back. As legal observers processed the shocking motion for sanctions filed against Blake Lively's legal team, many agreed this was the tipping point. What began as a high-profile celebrity lawsuit was now morphing into a full-blown legal crisis, one that questioned not just strategy but ethics, precedent, and reputation. The journalists' lawyers made their position clear: the subpoena had not only been unnecessary and invasive, it was punitive. The language in their motion was sharp, perhaps sharper than anything filed so far. It alleged that Blake Lively's legal team had knowingly pursued a course of discovery that violated constitutional protections, and they accused her attorneys of recklessly disregarding the law to gain control of the public narrative. Even the court seemed taken aback. The judge who had tentatively quashed the subpoena scheduled an emergency hearing to discuss whether sanctions would be appropriate. And that alone was a massive deal. Courts rarely even entertain sanctions in civil matters like this unless the behavior is egregious. And that's exactly what the public started calling it: egregious. Content creators who had been watching the case from afar began posting reaction videos titled, "Blake's team just got caught overreaching. How this subpoena backfired so badly it could cost $. The day the internet fought back and won by the hundreds, creators began dissecting the language in the subpoena and the sanctions filing, comparing it to other high-profile misuse of legal process cases. The growing consensus: Blake Lively's legal team may have overplayed their hand, and now there was no easy walk back. In Hollywood, the fallout was felt more quietly, but it was undeniable. A mid-level executive at one major streaming platform anonymously told a legal reporter the optics of attacking creators right now, especially when you're one of the most image-conscious couples in the industry, is just bad math. It looks desperate, it looks authoritarian, and honestly, it looks like guilt. Suddenly, publicists weren't just worried, they were panicked. Inside talent agencies and PR firms, crisis teams were deployed. Several projects involving Blake Lively, ranging from high-fashion endorsements to late-night appearances, were reportedly being reassessed behind the scenes. The internal discussions, according to leaked emails and industry whispers, weren't just about press coverage, they were about trust. If Blake's team had gone after creators once, who's to say they wouldn't try again? And Ryan Reynolds, his silence was starting to speak volumes. Up until this point, he had been a background character in the legal saga. But after the sanctions filing, his name started to appear more frequently in commentary videos and reaction threads. Several viral posts speculated about his involvement, asking, did Ryan know about the subpoenas? Was Ryan Reynolds privately advising this strategy? Is his brand in jeopardy because of Blake's legal war? And this time the speculation was no longer limited to creator commentary. Traditional media joined in. A headline from The Atlantic read, when celebrity influence meets legal overreach. The new era of reputation management backlash. In that article, legal experts weighed in on the broader consequences. One particularly scathing quote stood out. Using litigation to suppress journalists, even under the guise of discovery, is not just chilling, it's unconstitutional. And if the court agrees, the plaintiff's counsel could face formal disciplinary action. That word disciplinary echoed across social media. For many, this was now about more than Blake and Ryan. It was about the system, about holding powerful people and their legal teams accountable, about making sure that intimidation through litigation didn't become a norm. And while Blake Lively's lawyers had filed a response to the motion for sanctions, arguing that their actions were within the bounds of appropriate legal discovery, the court of public opinion wasn't convinced. People were seeing the cracks in the narrative. That carefully cultivated image of the Lively Reynolds household as charming, playful, and relatable. It was now being challenged by court filings that painted them fairly or not as powerful figures, trying to control speech. At the same time, a legal nonprofit that supports journalists announced it was forming a new legal defense fund, specifically for independent digital creators facing subpoenas from powerful entities. And guess what sparked it? This case. They called it the Creator Shield Initiative. In their press release, they didn't mince words. What we saw in this case was a dangerous trend, one where influence and money were used to silence. That ends now, and they weren't alone. Several First Amendment watchdog groups released statements applauding the judge's decision to tentatively quash the subpoena and vowing to monitor the sanctions hearing closely. And as more creators joined the movement, some organizing public meetups, others fundraising for legal costs, the tone of the discussion changed again. What began as fear and intimidation had turned into defiance. In one viral video, a creator summed it up best: they thought we were isolated, that they could shut us down one by one, but all they did was unite us. We are not afraid, we are not backing down, and we will not be silenced. Meanwhile, Lively's legal team began shifting strategy behind the scenes. Sources close to the case revealed that new lawyers had been brought in to review the subpoena-related filings. PR experts were also reportedly hired to clean up the mess, but for many it was too late. Trust had eroded, the image had cracked. And when the journalist at the center of it all was asked in an interview what they'd do if another subpoena came, they smiled and replied, "We'll fight again. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us." With the sanctions hearing approaching and pressure mounting from every side, legal, public, and press, it was clear Blake Lively and her team were losing control of the narrative. The question now wasn't whether the subpoena would be quashed. It already had been. The question was whether her team would face punishment for issuing it in the first place. And that question, it was about to be answered. So where do we stand now? A legal grenade has been thrown, and it came straight from a courtroom, not a gossip column. The judge's tentative decision to quash the subpoena wasn't just a procedural win. For one journalist, it was a declaration. Free speech is not up for sale. It doesn't bow to celebrity. It doesn't surrender to intimidation. And it certainly doesn't collapse under the weight of PR-friendly legal threats. Blake Lively's team, whether they realized it or not, awakened something much bigger than a defamation debate. They triggered a response from creators, journalists, lawyers, watchdog groups, and everyday people who saw through the strategy, who understood the play, who refused to let silence win. They tried to isolate one voice only to provoke a chorus. The legal strategy that may have been meant to protect Blake's image has now threatened it more than any tweet or YouTube video ever could. And Ryan Reynolds, once praised for his PR savvy and brand awareness, is now silently watching as the narrative spins out of control. The more they stay silent, the louder the questions become, the louder the movement grows. This case will be remembered not because of a celebrity's reputation, but because of what it exposed. The balance of power is shifting. Subpoenas used to be feared by independent creators, now they're being fought and they're being beaten. But this isn't just a victory lap, it's a warning shot, because there will be more cases like this. More powerful people trying to weaponize legal tools to control stories and punish critics. But now there's a precedent, a rallying cry. A reminder that when creators unite, when journalists stand firm, when lawyers speak out, truth doesn't just survive, it wins. So to everyone watching, this isn't the end. It's just the start of a new chapter. A chapter where free speech is protected not just by laws but by people willing to defend it. Blake Lively's subpoena may be quashed, but the message that's permanent. And if her team thought this battle would silence the press, they were wrong. The press is speaking louder than ever.